2025 wasn't supposed to feel like this. Not this chaotic, not this eerily familiar. Fires rage across continents once thought untouchable. Storm systems form where they never did before. Political systems unravel faster than they can be rebuilt. And quietly, almost like a whisper from the shadows, machines learn faster, think deeper, and speak more like us than ever before. To the casual observer, it might all seem like the expected turbulence of a modern world. But to those paying attention to the patterns, to the symbols, to the words buried in old manuscripts and holy texts, this isn't just coincidence, it's alignment. Scrolls once dismissed as mythology speak of a time when the fire from the heavens would scorch the earth, when nations shall rise against nations, and when knowledge shall multiply at the end of days. Look around, are we not there? The Book of Revelation, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the visions of Nostradamus, of Baba Vanga, of sages whose names history tried to erase, all pointing subtly, symbolically, sometimes terrifyingly directly to a time that looks uncomfortably like now. We were told these were metaphors, symbols, warnings maybe, but not literal, not tangible. But then why does the sky bleed red during eclipses that appear exactly on the dates ancient prophecies whispered about? Why do lost civilizations encode celestial maps that align precisely with our modern constellations in this decade? The truth is, we may not be running the timeline. We may be following it, like actors in a script written long ago by hands we no longer recognize. So here's the question, the one we've buried beneath centuries of skepticism and science and self-assurance. What if we are living inside a prophecy, not reading it, not interpreting it, but fulfilling it? What if the year we've entered, the year we thought would be just another blip on the timeline, is in fact the year that should not exist? And if so, why? For centuries, prophecy has lived in the margins, tucked between faith and folklore, sealed in forgotten scrolls, dismissed by science as the product of primitive minds or wishful thinking. Words once considered sacred have gathered dust in vaults, monasteries, and museum basements. But now, as the world begins to resemble the chaos these ancient warnings once described, the whispers are growing louder. The concept of prophecy isn't unique to one culture or belief. It spans continents and civilizations. From the cryptic verses of the Sibylline oracles to the coded patterns in the Torah, from the Vedic timelines of Kali Yuga to the Hopi warnings of the Great Purification, the theme is always the same, a foretelling of collapse, followed by renewal. Science, of course, scoffs. It demands data, repeatability, empirical proof. Prophecy offers none of that, only pattern, intuition, and resonance. But what happens when those patterns begin aligning with real events? When words written in ancient tongues start mirroring the headlines of today? Myth is being met with metrics. Allegory now dances with analytics. And faith, the kind passed down through generations, is starting to look less like blind belief and more like suppressed memory. For the first time in centuries, the divide between prophecy and reality is narrowing. Not because prophecy changed, but because the world finally caught up to its warnings. The dust is stirring, the whispers are calling, and those who once laughed at the idea of fate are beginning to listen. Not all prophecies speak in riddles. Some are disturbingly clear, naming decades, describing inventions not yet built, and foretelling a global shift that seems uncannily timed to the era we now inhabit. These aren't vague predictions made to fit any time. These are warnings etched with intent, pointing directly at the 2020s. The Islamic Hadiths describe a period when time will pass quickly, knowledge will be taken away, and trials will increase. In the Zohar, a mystical text from the Jewish tradition, the year 2025 is subtly encoded as a moment of unveiling, a time when hidden truths will emerge and the spiritual world will pierce the veil of the physical. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, predicted a period of great earth changes beginning in the early 21st century. He spoke of pole shifts, rising waters, and the spiritual awakening of humankind, all beginning in the 2020s. Even the enigmatic I-Ching, when overlaid onto a timeline by modern theorists, suggests that 2025 marks the final ripple in a long wave of human transformation, a year when time bends and the cycle ends. And then there's the one prophecy few dare speak aloud, a line buried in a forbidden apocryphal text, translated only once, whispered in academic circles but kept from the public eye. It reads, "In the year the veil lifts, mankind shall see as gods, yet understand nothing. Their towers will speak, their skies will change, and the old will return." Beside it, scrawled in the margin of an ancient manuscript, is a single number, 2025. Whether these are warnings or invitations is still unclear. But one thing is certain, the countdown isn't beginning. It has already begun. For generations, the Book of Revelation has stood as the Bible's most cryptic and controversial chapter. A swirling storm of beasts, plagues, trumpets, and seals layered with symbolism so dense, theologians have spent centuries attempting to decode its meaning. But today, in the age of rapid technological disruption and global instability, those once distant symbols are beginning to take on eerily modern shapes. Consider the image of the locusts, described as metallic, with the power to torment, flying in swarms and obeying no natural order. In the ancient world, it would have sounded like a fever dream. In ours, it sounds like automated drones, tiny machines surveilling, and in some cases already weaponized. Then there's the mark of the beast, a requirement placed upon all, rich or poor, to buy or sell only if they carry a specific mark upon their hand or forehead. Long considered metaphorical, it now draws direct parallels to the rise of biometric ID systems, microchip implants, and centralized digital currencies. Technology that tracks, that verifies, that controls access to society itself. And the fire from the sky? Once a poetic phrase, now a possibility as military satellites, hypersonic missiles, and solar storms threaten to redefine what power from above truly looks like. This isn't to say Revelation was literally predicting microchips or artificial intelligence. But the resonance is hard to ignore. It's not just the imagery, it's the pattern, a gradual tightening of control, a global system forming, natural disasters increasing in scale and frequency, and a sense, shared by many, that we are approaching something irreversible. For centuries, skeptics have dismissed Revelation as allegory, a relic of apocalyptic imagination. But in the shadows of 2025, as prophecy begins to rhyme with reality, the question shifts from, is this true, to something far more unsettling. What if we've been reading the future and didn't recognize it until now? Far from the towering cathedrals of Europe and the neon temples of the modern world, voices once echoed through the heat-soaked deserts of the Middle East. Voices that warned of a future unraveling. These were not just moral tales or poetic metaphors. They were prophecies, and many of them have gone unnoticed in the Western world. In Islamic tradition, the Hadith speak of a time known as the end of times, marked by signs both celestial and societal. Among them, the skies will change color, great smoke will rise, the earth will vomit its secrets, and strange fires will appear in the heavens. It's easy to pass over such language until we watch satellite footage of red-tinted skies over burning continents, or read headlines about ancient pathogens thawing from melting permafrost. Some scholars note a troubling overlap between these signs and events that have unfolded just in the past 2 decades. In Jewish mysticism, the Zohar, a revered Kabbalistic text, describes an age of disintegration followed by illumination, It warns of chaotic weather, a collapse of leadership, and a time when hidden wisdom will suddenly become visible. It even suggests that certain truths will only emerge once the great confusion spreads across the earth. Are these poetic metaphors for spiritual struggle? Or have we simply lived long enough to see their literal echoes unfold? These desert prophets, cloaked in robes and mystery, may have known something we forgot. That time is not linear, and that storms begin as whispers. Buried beneath layers of doctrine and centuries of revision lie the texts they never taught in Sunday school. Apocryphal scriptures, books once considered holy, later cast out, silenced, or labeled heretical. Among them, none are as haunting or prophetic as the Book of Enoch. Once revered by early Christian sects and quoted in the Epistle of Jude, the Book of Enoch tells of fallen angels, forbidden knowledge, and a judgment brought by celestial forces. It speaks of a world corrupted by technology not meant for man, of a time when the heavens would open and those who walk the earth would be judged not only for their actions but for what they accepted as truth. It was banned, forgotten, buried in the sands of Ethiopia until it resurfaced in the 18th century. And yet its words resonate with alarming clarity today. But Enoch is not alone. The Gospel of Thomas, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Book of Jubilees, each offers alternate visions of destiny, time, and the nature of man. They paint a different map of reality, one where prophecy is not just prediction but memory. A cycle rather than a straight line. Why were they hidden? Who decided which truths were canon and which were too dangerous to preserve? The deeper you look, the more consistent the pattern. Knowledge withheld, prophecy redacted, wisdom buried. Not to protect the public from falsehoods, but perhaps to protect power from truth. So we ask the question that lingers like smoke behind every forbidden page. What were they trying to protect us from? Or hide? Atlantis, a name that echoes like a myth yet refuses to die. Plato was the first to write of it, a mighty civilization said to have risen in power, then vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night. For centuries, scholars called it allegory, a philosophical parable. But what if it wasn't? Plato claimed his account came from Egyptian priests, keepers of time far older than Greece. They spoke of a world before our own, destroyed not by nature alone, but by the arrogance of men who had mastered forces they could not control. Does that sound like a lesson or a warning? Modern thinkers like Edgar Cayce, dubbed the sleeping prophet, took the idea further. In trance-like states, he spoke of an Atlantean society that wielded advanced technology, crystals, energy fields, even aerial craft. According to Cayce, Atlantis did not vanish in one cataclysm, but in stages, each collapse tied to natural disasters and spiritual decay. And he was clear. The final remnants of Atlantis would rise again in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Strangely, in places like the Bahamas and the Mediterranean, submerged structures have been found. Megaliths, roads, pillars, whose age and purpose remain disputed. Some suggest they're remnants of ancient coastal cities lost to rising seas. Others whisper, Atlantis. But this isn't just about sunken ruins, it's about cycles. Cultures rise, reach the apex of knowledge, then fall, often in uncanny patterns of time. The ancients knew this. They built calendars that stretched not decades but millennia. They warned that every golden age has its shadow, and that rebirth is always preceded by collapse. So where does that place us now? A world hurtling toward technological singularity, climate volatility, and spiritual disconnection. A world where echoes of a long-lost age feel uncomfortably close. Could 2025 mark not the end, but the beginning of another reset? Or worse, are we repeating a cycle we were never meant to forget? When December 21st, 2012 came and went without apocalypse, the world laughed. The Mayan calendar, it seemed, had been misunderstood, a doomsday hype that fizzled into nothing. But what if that was the mistake? The Mayans were master timekeepers. Their long count calendar didn't mark the end of the world, it marked the end of a Baktun, a 5,125-year cycle. To them, time wasn't linear. It was circular. Endings were beginnings. Shifts in energy, not explosions in sky. Some researchers now argue that 2012 wasn't a single-day event, but the opening of a transitional window, a slow, turbulent passage from one age into another. And that window, they say, ends in 2025. Interestingly, Mayan elders never said the world would end. They spoke of transformation, of the collapse of false structures and the return of ancestral wisdom, a thinning of the veil between worlds. And if you look around today, it's hard not to see the unraveling, collapsing institutions, mass awakenings, technological overreach, and a growing hunger for something ancient, something lost. 13 is a sacred number in Mayan cosmology. 13 years after 2012 brings us to 2025. Could this be the true pivot point? The year when the shift solidifies, when timelines split, when the seeds planted in darkness begin to bloom, whether into chaos or clarity? Maybe the Mayans didn't get it wrong. Maybe we just weren't ready to understand what they meant. Long before modern science mapped the stars, ancient Egypt was already watching the sky, not with telescopes but with temples. The pyramids at Giza, once dismissed as mere tombs, now reveal something far more complex. Alignments so precise they mirror the stars of Orion's belt, down to minute angles. Coincidence or design? Egyptian priests weren't just spiritual leaders, they were timekeepers. They understood celestial mechanics, the precession of the equinoxes, and the movement of the stars across epochs. The Dendera zodiac, carved into stone over 2,000 years ago, shows not just constellations but planetary positions so accurate they've stunned modern astronomers. But why did they encode this knowledge into stone? What were they tracking or counting down to? Some scholars believe the pyramids are markers in a great cosmic clock, aligned with specific ages in Earth's 26,000-year cycle. If so, the coming years, especially 2025, could mark a pivotal point in that cycle. The end of an age, a return of something once seen. Even more curiously, ancient texts like the Lamentations of Ippur describe a time of floods, darkness, and fire, civil collapse echoing eerily with modern fears. Are these memories of a past cataclysm, or coded prophecies of a future one? The Egyptians saw time not as a straight line, but as a wheel, a cycle that turns over and over, and perhaps they knew better than we do now that moments repeat, that warnings must be etched in stone so that when the stars return to their positions, so too does the choice. The question is, did we inherit their wisdom in time, or only their ruins? For over 450 years, the cryptic quatrains of Michel de Nostradamus, known to the world as Nostradamus, have stirred fascination, fear, and fierce debate. Skeptics call him vague. Believers call him prophetic. But history has a way of validating certain voices, especially when their words begin to echo through real-world events with unsettling precision. Nostradamus predicted the rise of Hitler, referencing a figure named Hister from the West who would lead Europe into war. He wrote of twin steel birds bringing fire to the new city, an image many now associate with 9/11. He even foretold of great floods, pestilence, and a great power rising in the east, all aligning with geopolitical shifts unfolding right now. But it's his less discussed quatrains, those aligned with this current decade, that have begun to turn even skeptics into uneasy observers. In one passage he writes, "The law of the sun shall be overthrown, confusion will reign in the west, a fire from the sky will fall and the pillars of power will tremble." Another, When the false eye becomes God and speech is no longer free, the year shall turn in blood and thunder. Interpretations vary, but consider the rise of artificial intelligence, machines that see and speak on our behalf, or the global erosion of legal norms, increasing censorship, and literal firestorms falling from the sky. One striking quatrain references the 25th year of the century as a threshold, when what was hidden shall become known, and the veil shall burn away. Coincidence? Projection? Or did Nostradamus glimpse something we're only beginning to understand? Perhaps he wasn't seeing the future in isolated flashes, but reading patterns woven through time. And if that's true, then the words he left behind were never predictions. They were warnings. And the clock he started may be about to strike. Born in a remote village in Bulgaria, Baba Vanga lost her sight as a child during a violent storm, an event that, according to those close to her, awakened something else entirely. Though blind, she began to see what others could not, visions of the future that would earn her both reverence and ridicule. Her predictions weren't vague philosophies, they were sharp, time-stamped glimpses of what was to come. She foresaw the Kursk submarine disaster, the 9/11 attacks, and even the rise of ISIS with chilling precision. But it's her foresight into the 2000s and 20s that now feels most pressing. Baba Vanga warned of a coming age where machines would govern the world, an era where human decisions would be guided not by people but by code. She predicted biological experiments would blur the line between healing and harm, and that nations would dissolve without war, not through bombs, but through slow unraveling from within. Her vision of the mid-2020s includes natural disasters that strike where they never had before, weather turning against man, and a sudden rise in mass spiritual awakenings, as if humanity were being forced to choose a path. And then there's the year she named explicitly, 2025. According to her accounts, 2025 marks the beginning of a great reckoning, a time when hidden powers will reveal themselves and humanity will face a decision that determines the shape of the next century. She may have been blind in the physical sense, but history has shown Baba Vanga saw far more than most ever could. Nikola Tesla, the man who lit the world, was more than just a scientist. He was a visionary haunted by something beyond the visible spectrum. Known for inventing alternating current radio transmission and technologies still ahead of our time, Tesla's public image was that of a genius inventor. But privately, he walked the line between physics and the metaphysical, often speaking in riddles that hinted at a deeper truth. He once said, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration." A strange statement from a man who lived in an age before quantum theory, before string theory, before modern science could even begin to test such claims. But Tesla wasn't guessing. He believed deeply that energy connected everything, that what we call matter was merely slowed down vibration, and that ancient civilizations knew this long before we did. Tesla's journals reveal dreams that bordered on prophecy. He wrote of images that came to him in flashes, visions of entire machines, blueprints complete with moving parts, appearing before he ever built them. He called them mind pictures, but they felt like downloads from something elsewhere. He revered ancient texts and believed that the pyramids were not tombs but energy machines. He was fascinated with the numbers 3, 6, and 9, claiming they held the key to unlocking the universe. Mainstream science still hasn't explained why he was so obsessed with that sequence, only that it guided his work relentlessly. Perhaps his most haunting quote, "The day science begins to study non-physical phenomena, it will make more progress in 1 decade than in all the previous centuries of its existence." Tesla wasn't anti-science. He was simply ahead of it. Straddling the boundary between rational proof and ancient wisdom, he saw a future where science and spirit no longer warred but merged. And in the year 2025, as technology accelerates and the veil continues to thin, we may finally catch up to what Tesla was trying to tell us all along. In 2012, theoretical physicist James Gates made a quiet but astonishing claim. While studying string theory equations, he discovered embedded computer code, specifically error-correcting code used in modern browsers. It was as if the fabric of the universe had digital DNA. Gates wasn't a science fiction writer, he was a respected academic. Yet what he found hinted at something radical, that our reality might be programmed. This wasn't an isolated theory. Elon Musk famously stated there's a 1 in billions chance we're living in base reality. Oxford philosopher Nick Bostrom built a compelling case for simulated existence. But beyond the headlines and hype, a deeper question lurks. If we're in a simulation, are there moments when the code becomes visible? Some physicists suggest that these glitches, unexplainable phenomena, Mandela effects, time distortions aren't random. They follow patterns, cycles, and several independent researchers point to 2025 as a potential breach year, a point when the simulation either updates or fails to hide itself. This isn't just about pixels flickering or déjà vu. It's about a deeper unraveling of consensus reality. More people are questioning time, memory, and causality. Prophecies, once dismissed, now feel eerily structured, like scripted storylines queued for release. So if this is a simulation and 2025 is a scheduled shift, then maybe prophecy isn't magic. Maybe it's just someone somewhere leaking the next update. For decades, climate scientists have pointed to a narrowing window, an invisible line we should never cross. And many of their models, though varied in details, share a haunting convergence: 2025. This is the year by which, they warned, global carbon emissions must drastically decline to avoid irreversible damage. It's the year certain feedback loops, melting permafrost, collapsing ice shelves, ocean current disruptions begin to accelerate beyond control. They call it the tipping point, not because the world ends, but because it changes course permanently. But here's where science and prophecy meet. Ancient traditions, from the Hopi to Hindu texts, speak of Earth entering a phase of purification, of fire, floods, and imbalance, of nature rebelling not out of malice, but as a response to humanity's disconnection. They didn't have satellites or carbon charts, but they spoke of a time when the earth shall tremble, the skies shall darken, and the waters shall rise. Is it possible that science is just now confirming what the ancients encoded in story and symbol? 2025 sits at the crossroads of both models, the hard data and the ancient warnings. We're watching wildfires in regions that were once rain-soaked, ocean temperatures breaking records, and storms behaving less like weather and more like warning signs. Maybe the Earth isn't just reacting to greenhouse gases. Maybe it's responding to a deeper cycle, one that was prophesied long before we had the words to measure it. It's a question few dare to ask. What if our calendar is wrong? Not just by a day or two, but by centuries. That's the premise of the phantom time hypothesis, a theory that challenges the very timeline we build our reality upon. Proposed by German historian Heribert Illig in the 1990s, the theory suggests that nearly 300 years of history, specifically from AD 614 to 911, were fabricated. In other words, we might be living not in 2025, but in the 1700s. Illig pointed to inconsistencies in medieval architecture, gaps in recorded history, and strange overlaps in reigns and events. Why do so few artifacts survive from this phantom era? Why are astronomical records from that time curiously vague or duplicated? His bold claim certain elites, possibly within the Holy Roman Empire and the Vatican, manipulated history to legitimize their power, inserting false years and reassigning historical events. It sounds absurd until you look closer. Even today, our calendar has problems. The Gregorian system replaced the Julian because the latter drifted slowly out of sync with the seasons. Pope Gregory XIII's reform in 1582 deleted 10 days from the calendar to compensate. But what if more was lost or added than we realize? If the timeline is altered, then what does 2025 actually represent? Could it be that the dates encoded in ancient prophecy aren't aligned with our current numbering at all, but still hold true when recalibrated? Is it possible that the year the veil lifts isn't a prediction of our future, but a memory of something long buried returning now in the correct cycle? We trust our timeline like we trust the ground beneath our feet. But if that ground was shifted quietly, strategically, then we may be living not in the time we think, but in someone else's design. Beneath the marble halls and golden domes of Vatican City lies one of the most impenetrable vaults on Earth, the Vatican Secret Archives. Over 50 miles of shelving, ancient manuscripts, papal letters, coded documents, and time-worn books the public has never seen. Some date back over 1,000 years. Others, no one even knows. Among the whispers that escape its sealed corridors are tales of alternative calendars, forgotten timelines, and ancient systems of timekeeping, systems that don't just chart the past but count down toward a prophetic future. Some researchers believe the Church holds calendars based not on solar years but on celestial cycles, alignments of stars and planetary movements that were once used to mark spiritual epochs. And strikingly, some of these esoteric timelines terminate or converge around the mid-2020s. Why hasn't this been made public? Why guard knowledge of time so fiercely? Perhaps because time itself is power. Whoever controls the perception of time controls the narrative of history, prophecy, and destiny. If the true calendar were revealed, if humanity realized it had been misled or misaligned, religious and political structures could crack at their foundation. We are told to measure time in hours and years, but within the Vatican's shadows, time is measured in ages, in cycles, in turnings, and it seems whatever clock they've been keeping, it's pointing to now. Hidden in the architecture of ancient temples and encoded in sacred texts is a concept nearly forgotten by modern minds. The Great Year. It's not a calendar year, but a vast cosmic cycle, roughly 26,000 years long, caused by the slow wobble of Earth's axis known as the precession of the equinoxes. Ancient civilizations knew this. The Greeks called it the Platonic year. The Hindus built it into their yuga cycles, marking golden and dark ages. The Mayans encoded it within their Long Count calendar, aligning ages with celestial shifts. And across these cultures, a strange pattern appears. Many of them highlight our current era, not as an end, but as a powerful point of transition. According to this model, 2025 is more than a year. It's a turning point, a crest in the cosmic wave where one age gives way to another. The Hindu texts describe the end of Kali Yuga, the age of chaos and spiritual ignorance. The Greeks spoke of a returning golden age following great disruption, and the Mayan elders, even after the misunderstood 2012 prophecy, insist the true awakening begins 13 years later in 2025. Could it be that these cultures, separated by oceans and centuries, were tracking the same celestial code? Modern science acknowledges precession, but often misses its metaphysical weight. To the ancients, this wasn't just astronomy, it was destiny. A clock built into the stars themselves. And if their timing is right, then 2025 isn't just a year on the calendar. It's the crossing of a threshold written not by man, but by the heavens. For ancient people, the sky was more than backdrop, it was message. A cosmic manuscript turning page by page above them, whispering signs to those who knew how to read. And across scriptures and civilizations, The moon turning to blood and the sun darkening have always meant one thing: a great shift is near. In the Bible, the book of Joel warns the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Revelation echoes the same. The sixth seal was opened, and the whole moon became as blood. These weren't poetic flourishes, they were astronomical markers, and in recent years they've reappeared. Between 2014 and 2015, a rare tetrad, 4 blood moons in a row, unfolded on significant Jewish feast days. Many dismissed it as coincidence, but others saw it as a celestial alarm clock announcing the start of a countdown. And now, with eyes on 2025, the heavens stir again. That year, astronomers anticipate a total solar eclipse, visible across multiple continents, overlapping with a series of lunar eclipses, each falling near historically charged dates. The skies will turn. Shadows will fall. And for those watching, it won't feel random. Even more compelling is how these events mirror ancient patterns. The Maya built entire cities to track such cycles. The Egyptians aligned their monuments to solstices and star risings. And the Hebrews marked prophetic timelines by blood moons and eclipses, events seen not just as weather but as warnings. When we look up today, we may see celestial mechanics. But to the ancients, and perhaps to those paying attention now, these are cosmic signatures tied to turning points in human history. 2025 isn't just a year, it's a page in the sky, and this time the writing glows in red. Since the dawn of recorded history, comets have been seen not as random visitors but as omens. Streaking across the sky with ghostly tails, they disrupted the normal order of the heavens. Unpredictable, uncommanded, and unforgettable. To ancient eyes, they were harbingers of change, sentinels of fate, and sometimes silent messengers of collapse. In Roman times, comets were linked to the deaths of emperors. In China, meticulously recorded comet appearances often aligned with dynastic upheaval or natural disaster. The Aztecs, too, viewed comets as warnings from the gods, signaling that a cycle was about to break. Now in 2025, another one approaches. Astronomers have identified a newly discovered comet expected to pass close to Earth in that year. It's being studied like any celestial object, tracked, named, analyzed. But to those familiar with prophetic cycles, its timing feels less like a discovery and more like a fulfillment. What does it mean when ancient seers spoke of fiery serpents in the sky or stars that fall but never burn? Were they describing myth, or sightings we're only now catching up to? It may be tempting to view the coming comet as nothing more than ice and rock. But if history has taught us anything, it's that the appearance of a comet isn't just about the object itself. It's about what follows after. In an ironic twist of prophecy, it's not a mystic or ancient text making waves about 2025, it's artificial intelligence. Algorithms fed vast oceans of data from economics, environment, geopolitics, technology, and human behavior have begun to converge on a single forecast, 2025 as a singularity window. But this isn't just about AI growing smarter. It's about an inflection point, a moment when systems shift in ways no one, human or machine, can fully predict. Some models suggest global disruptions, others foresee economic realignments, and a few point to something stranger: the collapse of predictive stability itself. When machines can no longer forecast what comes next, what does that mean for the reality they've been trained on? Futurists like Ray Kurzweil long predicted that the 2020s would usher in the technological singularity, when machine intelligence outpaces human comprehension. His own timeline marked mid-decade as a key threshold. And now, we're watching it unfold. AI writing laws, diagnosing patients, designing weapons, and even composing music that stirs the human soul. But here's the unsettling question. What do these models see that we don't? Are they detecting unseen fractures in the world system? Patterns we've ignored? Or are they simply reflecting back the prophecy we've been unwittingly writing for centuries? It's one thing when prophets make predictions. It's another when machines start doing the same, especially when they all point to the same year. In an age of information, not all knowledge flows freely. Algorithms curate our searches, platforms bury unpopular viewpoints, and entire conversations vanish without explanation. Among the most aggressively filtered, discussions around prophecy, pattern recognition, and alternative timelines. Why? It's one thing to silence conspiracy theories based on fear or misinformation. But pattern-based analysis, observing historical cycles, recurring symbols, and ancient texts, falls into a different category. It's not blind belief, it's observation, correlation, and increasingly it's being erased. Search for prophecy on mainstream platforms and you'll find debunks, satire, and shallow summaries. Not deep dives, not thoughtful comparisons, not the content that asks hard questions. The moment someone draws a connection between a biblical verse, a global event, and a shifting solar cycle, they're flagged, deboosted, or labeled as fringe. But if prophecy is just superstition, why censor it? This isn't about religious dogma. It's about pattern recognition, a cognitive process that's deeply human. When the same symbols appear across civilizations, when dates repeat, when hidden knowledge aligns with unfolding events, people start noticing. And when they notice, they question. And when they question, control weakens. There's power in the narrative that time is random, history is chaos, and prophecy is myth. But there's danger for those in power when too many people start seeing order beneath the chaos. That's when the pattern becomes threatening, because patterns suggest purpose, and purpose implies a design that may not include those who wish to control the outcome. So maybe the real question isn't, why do people believe in prophecy? It's, why are the systems so afraid we might? Throughout history, prophecies have come and gone. But some didn't fade, they were erased, redacted from texts, misquoted in translations, buried in libraries, or simply disappeared. Take the third secret of Fatima, a prophecy allegedly delivered by the Virgin Mary to children in 1917. 2 parts were revealed. The third, delayed for decades, and when it was finally published, even devout scholars said this isn't the original. What changed? And who decided what we were allowed to see? There are similar examples, verses from the Book of Enoch removed from early Bibles, missing pages from prophetic Native American scrolls, audio recordings of Cold War-era predictions that vanished from public archives. Some resurface in dusty basements or bootleg copies, but they come with a question. Why were words no one believed worth hiding? If prophecy is fiction, why fear it? Unless it wasn't fiction at all? Not all who explore prophecy are mystics or outsiders. Some are scholars, respected, credentialed, and deeply logical. That is, until they cross an invisible line. Take Dr. Thomas S., a historian who began to study the Dead Sea Scrolls' messianic timelines. His work suggested prophetic patterns tied to modern geopolitical cycles. Within a year, his university pulled funding, his papers were withdrawn, his lectures were canceled. Or Reverend Angela M., a theologian who dared to compare Revelation symbols to recent scientific developments. She wasn't discredited, she was ignored, erased from panels and journals she once led. What happens when academic curiosity brushes against forbidden knowledge? Doors close. Grants vanish, careers dissolve. These aren't fringe voices, they were pillars in their fields until they asked the wrong questions or saw the right patterns. The message is clear. Study prophecy, and you risk becoming part of one. For centuries we laughed at the prophets, the dreamers, the doomsayers and visionaries who spoke in riddles and warned of times to come. We dismissed them as relics of superstition, unfit for a rational age. But now, as the ground shifts beneath our feet and the skies echo with fire and smoke, a question begins to rise softly at first, then with thunder. What if they were right? What if the books we ignored, the Book of Revelation, the Zohar, the Bhagavad Gita, the Hopi tablets, weren't warnings from the past but messages for the future? Look around. Weather no longer follows patterns. Fires rage in places that were once frozen. Oceans warm and churn with unfamiliar rage. And still we scroll, barely noticing how eerily the chaos matches words written centuries ago. Politics have become theater. Borders shift, systems bend, and truth has become a currency few can afford. Artificial intelligence now writes laws, judges art, and in some corners shapes belief itself. Machines learn faster than we do, and still the ancient texts speak of a time when knowledge would increase but wisdom would vanish. Celestial alignments once thought rare are now arriving like clockwork. Blood moons, eclipses, comets. The same sky signs that ancient astronomer priests once tracked as markers of coming change. We've spent decades building the myth of progress, but what if that myth was only a loop, a repeating cycle, one that the ancients tried to map and warn us about? This isn't fear-mongering, it's recognition. So we ask, maybe for the first time with sincerity, what if the prophets we silenced weren't wrong, but simply early? If prophecy is real, then it doesn't predict a single outcome, it presents a choice. And in 2025, the choice appears clearer than ever: awakening or collapse. One path leads inward, toward remembrance, a spiritual realignment with nature, with one another, and with whatever force set this cosmic rhythm in motion. The ancients called it the return to truth, a world less obsessed with control and more tuned to harmony. This too was foretold in nearly every sacred tradition. The other path is collapse, not sudden but systemic, a slow unraveling of the structures we trusted: economic, technological, environmental, social. The signs are already here. If ignored, they will spread, multiply, consume. Both were predicted, both are unfolding. And humanity, knowingly or not, is tipping the scales. What if 2025 is not about what happens to us, but what do we finally decide to become? In the ancient calendars, this year was marked. In coded scrolls, whispered visions, star alignments, and sacred math, 2025 always stood out. A year not of ending, but of unveiling, of fulfillment. Prophets never gave us dates casually. They gave signs, patterns, cycles. And now every one of those signs appears to be converging. The sky turns red, systems shake. A sense grows in the collective mind that something is approaching, something irreversible. We won't name it. That's not what this is about. But across traditions, one final event looms, sometimes called the Great Purification, sometimes the Last Trumpet, or the day the veil falls. It's not always destruction, but it is always transformation, a crossing point, a reckoning. And all of them, every mystic, priest, seer, and scholar who dared to look forward, pointed to the mid-decade, to now. Whatever happens next won't be by accident, because the final chapter has already been written. After all the signs, scrolls, visions, eclipses, and warnings, what if the true prophecy was never about the sky or the stars or the fall of nations? What if it was you? Across every sacred text, buried in every myth and mystery, there is a quiet echo, an idea that prophecy is not just prediction but reflection. That the symbols and stories aren't forecasts of an outer world but metaphors for something awakening within us. Something ancient, something alive. The fall of Babylon, the rise of Atlantis, the fire from the sky. Could these be allegories for the fall of ego, the rise of collective memory, the illumination of truth? Could Revelation's beast be a metaphor for our own inner programming, fear, greed, disconnection? The sages may not have been warning us about technology or war or climate alone, but about forgetting who we are. Forgetting that we are not passengers on a timeline, but authors of it. That every cycle begins with awareness and every rebirth begins with a choice. Human evolution has always moved in pulses. Moments where the veil thins, the old ways die, and a new self is born. Perhaps 2025 isn't about external collapse or cosmic punishment. Perhaps it's about a mass internal reckoning, a time when enough of us ask, why am I here? What story am I continuing, and which one am I finally ready to end? The ancient messages weren't delivered just to warn us, they were written to awaken us. And maybe, just maybe, the reason prophecy feels like it's coming true now is because we're finally ready to hear what it was always trying to say. Prophecy is often treated like fate, a script already written, unchangeable, waiting to unfold. But what if that's only half true? What if prophecy isn't about predicting a fixed future, but tuning into a frequency, a signal that exists outside of time, waiting for the right minds to receive it? Like music on a dial, you only hear it when you're tuned in. And maybe the prophets of old were just better receivers. But now, in this accelerated age, more of us are hearing the signal, feeling it, noticing synchronicities, patterns, moments that seem to echo from the past and ripple into the future. Not as accidents, but as clues. Could it be that we're not reading someone else's vision, but writing it as we go? Reality responds to belief. Frequency responds to focus. And perhaps the most important prophecy isn't the one etched in stone, but the one we're authoring every time we choose love over fear, awareness over automation, purpose over programming. In the end, maybe time isn't a straight line or even a circle. Maybe it's a mirror, a living reflection of where we are, what we believe, and what we're becoming. The prophecies we've explored weren't about dates and disasters. They were doorways inviting us to look closer, listen deeper, and ask the questions that silence was never meant to answer. 2025 may be a turning point, or it may simply be a symbol, a number we projected meaning onto, because something inside us knew it was time to awaken. But here's the truth. There is no final hour. There is only this moment, this breath, this choice. The clock we've been fearing may never have had hands at all, because the countdown wasn't tracking destruction. It was measuring readiness. And now that we've heard the call, the mystery doesn't end. It begins.